My name is Dorothy Langston. I'm 62 years old. I used to believe that blood ties were unbreakable, sacred. But one morning, the only person I ever called family walked away, taking everything I owned. I should have been furious, but instead, I smiled, because the only thing he truly took was something I had already let go of. My name is Dorothy Langston. I'm 62 years old. That might sound like the final chapter of a life, but honestly, I feel like I'm only just beginning to learn how to live for myself. I was born and raised in rural Iowa, where summers scorched the ground and winters were so bitter that frost coated the backyard from October. Our house sat tucked beside a small patch of woods, about 10 miles down a dusty red road from the nearest town. That's where my brother Martin and I grew up together. Our parents died in a car accident when I was 19 and Martin was just 13. Everything after that felt like chaos. I had just started my freshman year, studying accounting at Des Moines, when I got the call from the police. By the time I returned home, the neighbors had arranged the funeral, our grandparents were too old to care for Martin, and they asked me, a college student without a degree, if I was willing to take him in. I didn't think twice. I dropped out of school, moved back home, got a job at a bakery, and later worked as a grocery store cashier. Every day, I saved every penny I could to pay off debts and raise Martin. He was smart, quick, and charming. People loved him. But he was also irresponsible, impatient, and always believed things would work out without ever lifting a finger to make them work. I told myself that if I just tried hard enough, Martin would grow up. He'd become grateful. He'd come back to me, not just for help, but to stay. But year after year, Martin only showed up when he needed money, a place to crash, or someone to blame when things went wrong. I never married, not because no one asked, but because I never felt there was room in my life for anyone else when all of my heart belonged to my brother. I still remember my 40th birthday. I bought 2 tickets to a live music show in Cedar Rapids. I imagined a warm, joyful evening, just the two of us singing along to old songs. But Martin never showed. He texted that something came up and disappeared for 3 months. And yet every time he returned, I opened the door. Every time he said, "I'll change," I believed him. As time passed, I became a full-time accountant at a local trucking company. I worked there for 27 years. No one really noticed me, but everyone trusted me. I lived simply, barely spent anything. I grew vegetables in my backyard, sewed my own curtains, and never traveled more than 200 miles from where I was born. The old wooden house where Martin and I grew up was still my home. I'd replace the roof, the windows, even refinish the floors with my own hands. Every little corner held a memory. The kitchen table where Mom baked cookies, the porch step where I pulled nails out of Martin's foot after one of his many reckless stunts, the crawl space in the attic where I hid letters from an old classmate I once cared for but never dared to tell. Martin never stayed anywhere long. He lived like life was a waiting room. One day a musician, the next a real estate investor, then a coffee shop owner. Each venture lasted only months. The last time he stayed at my place for more than 3 days was after he went bankrupt. I let him crash on my couch all winter. I remember handing him the thickest blanket in the house that first night. He looked at me and said, "You're the only one who's never left me." I held on to that sentence for years, as if by always being the one who stayed, I'd somehow earned the right to keep him. And then, when I turned 62, I finally saw the truth. Some people haven't left you, only because you've never given them the chance to. The next part of the story begins with the moment I left home for just 1 week and returned to find it was no longer my home at all. It was a crisp Monday morning in early October when I pulled into the driveway. The leaves had turned that particular golden orange that always made the woods look like they were on fire. The house looked peaceful from the outside, unchanged, still, familiar. But the moment I turned the key and stepped inside, I knew something wasn't right. There was silence, not the kind of peaceful quiet I loved, but the heavy, hollow kind, the kind that followed absence. The first thing I noticed was the missing rug, the hand-woven one I had brought back from a local artisan fair years ago. It was gone. Then the side table, the lamp, the framed photo of my parents on the mantel. I moved slowly from room to room, and with each step, more of the life I had built disappeared. The bookshelves, empty, the kitchen, cleared out. Even the cast iron pan my mother used had vanished. I opened the pantry. the linen closet, the guest room door, nothing. And when I opened the door to the small office where I kept my important documents, bank statements, retirement account details, the deed to the house, all of it was gone. No sign of forced entry, no broken locks, no chaos, just absence. On the kitchen counter, under a chipped coffee mug, sat a single sheet of lined notebook paper. It read, "Dorothy, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I needed a fresh start, and this was the only way I could get it. You've always been strong. You'll bounce back. Don't look for me. Martin." I didn't cry, not then. I sat down on the kitchen stool, the one piece of furniture still left, and stared out the window, and then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I had seen it coming. The last time Martin had stayed with me, he borrowed $8,000 from my savings to help a friend and never mentioned it again. That had been the moment something inside me shifted. I started thinking about what would happen if he crossed another line, one I didn't even know how to define at the time. So I prepared. I quietly met with a financial advisor and transferred most of my funds into a protected trust account. I scanned and saved all important documents to a secure cloud service, storing only copies in my home office. And weeks before leaving for my trip, I rented a storage unit and moved every irreplaceable item, photos, heirlooms, my mother's wedding ring, into it. The furniture in the house? Mostly staging rentals for the open house I'd been planning. Martin didn't take my life. He took the shell of it, and I let him, because I needed the shell to break before I could finally step out of it. Over the next few days, I did what needed to be done. I filed a police report, not to press charges, but to document everything. I contacted my attorney, who confirmed the trust account was untouched. I called the bank to close any vulnerable access points. I changed every lock, every password, and most importantly, every pattern I'd spent decades trapped in. I didn't try to find Martin. I didn't respond to his note. I didn't ask why. I already knew. People like Martin don't steal because they hate you. They steal because they've always believed the world owes them something, and you're the safest one to take it from. What surprised me most was how calm I felt, as if my life had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. 1 week later, I walked into a quiet apartment complex by the lake, met with a kind landlord named Esther, and signed a lease for a 1-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor. It had light hardwood floors, a small balcony with morning sun, and just enough space for someone ready to start small again. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt free. Free from the house, the history, the heartbreak of waiting for someone to love me the way I loved them. Free to begin again, not in fear, but with clarity. And that clarity, oddly enough, came the day I stood in an empty house, holding nothing but a note that said, "Don't look for me." My new apartment smelled faintly of pine and fresh paint. The light through the balcony windows filtered in gently, soft and golden. For the first few days, I didn't unpack much. I sat with the silence, trying not to fill it too quickly. For the first time in decades, I had no responsibilities to anyone but myself. I bought a small round table from a thrift store, a second-hand armchair, and a lamp with a stained glass shade that cast warm colors against the white walls at night. I didn't need much. In fact, I found a strange sense of peace in the minimalism. Every item I brought into that space had to earn its place, just like every person moving forward would need to earn mine. The first week was quiet, but not lonely. I took long walks along the lake path each morning, waving at joggers, smiling at dogs pulling their owners. I started writing again. Nothing serious, just thoughts, memories, reflections. It had been so long since I'd asked myself what I wanted, what I needed. For years, my life had been a reaction to someone else's needs, moods, crises. Now each day was a blank canvas, and it terrified me, but it also thrilled me. About 2 weeks in, I attended a community cooking class held at the local recreation center. Not because I didn't know how to cook, I'd been feeding 2 people on a single income for decades, but because I wanted to be around people. People who didn't know my history, who didn't carry assumptions. I met a woman named Linda, recently widowed, and we started talking over soup prep. She laughed at my dry sense of humor. I hadn't heard my own laughter like that in a while. That weekend, I volunteered at a clothing drive, then a book fair, then the monthly garden club meeting. I didn't plan to get involved in anything long-term, but piece by piece, I started showing up, not because I had to, because I could. The truth was, I had been disappearing for years, behind obligations, behind someone else's chaos. Now, for the first time, I was visible again, to myself. One morning, as I drank tea on my small balcony, I found myself thinking of Martin, not with bitterness, but with quiet recognition. I didn't know where he was, I didn't want to, but I no longer carried the weight of his choices like they were my burden. He had made a choice, and so had I. Some people carry storms with them. They don't mean to destroy things, but they don't know how to live without turbulence. And if you keep building your home inside their weather, you'll never feel the sun. That month, I started going to therapy. Not because I was broken, but because I wanted to better understand why I had let my life become so small for so long. I wanted to learn how to expand again, gently, honestly, and without guilt. In one session, my therapist asked me, "When do you feel most like yourself?" And I said, without hesitation, when I'm walking early in the morning before the world wakes up, when it's just me and the sound of my feet on the pavement. So I kept walking. By December, my apartment had more warmth. Not clutter, but comfort. A knit blanket from a neighbor. A small framed quote that read, "What you allow is what will continue." I hosted Linda for tea. We talked about grief, yes, but also about travel, recipes, second chances. She asked if I'd ever consider visiting the coast. I said I'd never seen the ocean up close. She promised we'd plan a trip in spring. I smiled. I almost believed her. New Year's Eve came, and I lit a single candle by the window. I didn't stay up until midnight. I didn't make resolutions, but I whispered a quiet promise to myself, to no longer wait for someone to come home, to start living mine. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't need to. I had faced emptiness and found that I wasn't empty. I was enough, and sometimes that's where everything truly begins. Spring didn't rush in. It tiptoed, lingered, touched everything softly, as if asking permission to bloom again. By late March, tiny blossoms pushed through the soil in the park gardens near my apartment. The ducks returned to the lake, and I, too, found myself emerging from a kind of winter. Linda and I made good on our promise. We planned a coastal trip for early April. 3 days, no itinerary, just rest. We rented a modest cabin near Cannon Beach in Oregon, a weathered little place with creaky floorboards and a front porch that faced the sea. The first morning, I stood barefoot in the cold sand, watching the tide come in. The sound of the waves wasn't soothing, it was honest, untamed. It reminded me that life doesn't have to be quiet to be healing. We spent hours walking, sometimes in silence, other times we talked like women who had nothing left to prove. Linda told me about the years she spent pretending to be happy for her husband's sake. I told her about Martin, about the things I'd never said out loud, the resentment I buried, the guilt I carried, the hope that refused to die. We laughed about things that would have made us cry a year ago. On the last night, we sat on the porch with mugs of chamomile tea. Linda turned to me and said, "You know, we're not too old to start something new." I looked at her, smiled, and replied, "I know." For the first time, I truly believed that. When we came home, I rearranged my apartment, not drastically, but with intention. I bought a few new plants, gave away things that no longer sparked joy, and painted one wall a soft sage green. It was the first time in years I had made a space just for me. I also started waking up earlier. There was something sacred about those first quiet hours of the day. I'd brew a cup of tea, sit by the window, and write in my journal. Sometimes just a few words, sometimes pages. The act itself became a kind of prayer, a declaration that I mattered. Eventually, I turned those thoughts into short essays and began posting them online under a pseudonym. The feedback was quiet but kind. People resonated. One woman messaged me, "I feel like you've lived in my skin." Another wrote, "Your words help me get through my morning." One day, Linda forwarded me a call for submissions from a local magazine. I hesitated, but she nudged me. So I sent a piece titled, "After the Emptying." It was published in their May issue. The editor asked if I had more. I said yes, and meant it. That one yes opened doors I didn't know were waiting. I was invited to speak at a small library gathering, then a community wellness group, then a church women's retreat. Each time I talked not about pain, but about returning to yourself, about the difference between forgiveness and letting go, about how peace often arrives disguised as loneliness. At one event, a woman came up to me, tears streaming down her face. She simply said, "Thank you. Now I know I'm not the only one." And isn't that what we all want? To not be the only one. I didn't plan on becoming a voice for anyone. I just kept showing up, authentically, quietly, fully. Some evenings, I'd play piano at the park if no one else was around. My fingers remembered more than I expected. Music became another way of praying, not for answers, but for presence. I found myself mentoring a few younger women, former caregivers, newly divorced, women starting over. I didn't offer advice. I asked questions. I listened. I reminded them that boundaries are not walls. They're doors with locks you hold the key to. In all of this, Martin came to mind less and less. When he did, it was with a soft ache. Not anger, not regret. Just a recognition that some people are chapters, not the whole book. I still had the photo of us as kids, taken on a summer afternoon, barefoot in the yard, dirt on our cheeks. I didn't throw it away. I just moved it from the nightstand to the bookshelf. A part of me, but not the center of me. One morning, I looked in the mirror and didn't see the woman who waited, who worried, who gave until she was empty. I saw someone still becoming, still learning, still worthy. That summer, I turned 63. Linda surprised me with a picnic in the park, complete with candles, sandwiches, and a chocolate cake that tasted like hope. A few people I met through writing came. Some brought flowers. One woman, Sarah, brought a letter. It read, "You showed me how to stand up without hardening, how to start over without apology. Thank you for reminding me that it's not too late." I read it 3 times, folded it carefully, and kept it beside my journal. That night, under a sky full of stars, I whispered to the quiet, "This is enough. This is more than enough." For the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for something or someone to make life feel complete. I was living a life I built with my own hands, heart, and hope, and I was proud. Still afraid sometimes, still healing, but proud. And that, I think, is what wholeness really is. Autumn arrived with its usual quiet fanfare, the trees cloaked in amber, the breeze carrying that particular crispness that only October could bring. It had been 1 full year since the day I returned to an empty house, and even longer since I had first begun letting go of a version of myself I no longer recognized. I had not expected the past to come knocking, and yet on a Sunday morning, as I sorted through the latest submissions for the community writing group, I paused at a name I hadn't seen in decades, M. Langston. I blinked, read it again. My fingers hesitated over the page. Martin. My first reaction wasn't fear or anger. It was stillness. That same kind of stillness that comes right before a heavy snowfall. No panic, just presence. I could have told someone. I could have asked that he not attend. But something inside me, a part far older, wiser, more whole, simply said, "Let it be." The next meeting was held in our usual space, a modest room at the library with tall windows and folding chairs. I arrived early, like always, set up the coffee urn, laid out pens and name tags. And then I waited. At 6:14 p.m., he entered. Martin looked smaller than I remembered, not physically but in energy. He didn't fill the room the way he once did, not with charm or stories or easy laughter. He was quieter, still. His eyes met mine for a moment, and in that glance there was no challenge, no guilt, just acknowledgement. He nodded. I nodded back. That first night we didn't speak. He sat in the back. He didn't share, but he listened, really listened. And when the meeting ended, he stayed a few extra minutes to help stack chairs. I watched him from the doorway. I didn't say thank you. I didn't need to. He came the next week, and the one after that. At first it felt surreal. This man who had once walked out of my life with pieces of it in his pocket now returned. Not to fix the past, but to sit in the same quiet I had learned to cherish. He never asked me for anything, no apologies, no explanations. And perhaps that was the most respectful thing he could have done. Weeks passed. One night, after a particularly raw sharing circle, I found Martin standing near the back bookshelf, gently thumbing through a collection of poetry. "This," he said, holding up a worn paperback. "You used to read this to me? I never understood it then. I think I do now." I didn't reply, but I stayed there beside him, letting the silence stretch comfortably between us. Eventually, he submitted a story to the group. It was about a man who always left before he could be left, a man who mistook freedom for escape, who didn't know how to ask for help until it was too late. The group responded warmly. No one knew it was autobiographical. No one needed to, but I did. I left early that night. Later, when I opened my journal to write, a folded piece of paper fell out. It was a childhood photo of Martin and me, ages 6 and 12, standing in front of the old oak tree at our childhood home. On the back, in his handwriting, "I didn't know how to stay. Thank you for staying longer than I deserved." I pressed the photo flat and tucked it into the back cover. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. I simply understood. As winter approached, I found myself reflecting more deeply, not just on Martin, but on everything that had changed. Linda and I planned a trip to the Southwest, chasing the sun across Arizona's red rocks and New Mexico's wide skies. We ate outside, laughed over simple meals, and spoke often of the things we'd still like to do. Life no longer felt like a series of closed doors. It felt like open windows. One afternoon, in a quiet cafe in Santa Fe, Linda turned to me and said, "You seem more rooted now than ever." I smiled. I think it's because I stopped waiting to be understood. I started understanding myself. The greatest closure, I'd come to learn, isn't found in confrontation or dramatic reconciliations. It lives in the quiet decision to move forward without needing permission. Martin and I never had a big talk. No long overdue apology, no dramatic reunion. But slowly, week by week, we learned to inhabit the same space again, not as siblings tangled in history, but as people, growing separately, gently aware of each other. And maybe that was enough. Maybe healing doesn't always look like repair. Maybe it looks like peace. I still lead the writing group. I still wake early, make tea, write. Some mornings Martin arrives early too, helps set up, says little. But in the way he holds the chairs, wipes the whiteboard, I see something that once was missing: care. One night I closed the meeting with a quote: "The past is not a chain, but a root, and from it we grow, imperfect, upward, still reaching." I caught Martin looking down, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. And I knew this was not about erasing what had been. It was about choosing again and again to be present. And this time, we both stayed. Life has a way of surprising you, sometimes with heartbreak, sometimes with grace, and sometimes with both in the same breath. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. None of us do. But I do know this: I no longer carry the weight of waiting to be seen, waiting to be heard, waiting for someone to finally choose me, because I have chosen myself. The journey I've walked wasn't perfect. It was jagged, painful, and uncertain, but it was mine. And in owning it fully, with its betrayals and beginnings, its silence and second chances, I have reclaimed something I didn't even realize I'd lost: my voice, my dignity, my peace. Not every ending comes with closure. Not every wound leaves clean edges. But if you're lucky, and if you're willing, you find the strength to begin anyway, to write a new story, one word at a time. Not in spite of what hurt you, but because you choose not to live anchored to it. This is not a story about a brother and a sister. It's not even a story about betrayal. It's about becoming, and the quiet, powerful act of staying with yourself. And so, if you find yourself standing in the ruins of what once was, may you remember, you are not broken, you are rebuilding, and that is where the real story begins.